Good evening and welcome to another edition of Down to the Wire. I'm your host, derbiologist, and joining me again this week is Capping with Candice. Candice here. And Candice, this week we are going to kind of tackle some turf races. First off, we kind of like to target a juvenile race every week. And Friday at Belmont, kind of interesting, a turf race for juveniles and some kind of a mixture of win early pedigrees and some big profile names in there.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw this race on an Acrobase in the entry list, it kind of jumped off the page for me because, yeah, we definitely have some of the bigger name trainers and sires, and I agree. There's kind of a definite mix of some pedigrees that, you think are more win early, and maybe some who, we don't know how much they'll show right now necessarily, but they have classy pedigrees that might just want to end up routing and will do better later on in the year. There's a few nice ones mentioned here. There is a kitten in here, Granny's Kitten, with Mike Maker and, the Ramseys. And, the kittens are a little bit interesting because Kitten's Joy as a sire, he has a pretty good strike rate with firsters. It's around 18% this year. But many of his firsters don't end up actually debuting at 2 years old. Many of them end up debuting at 3, or they end up debuting later on in the year as 2-year-olds because they tend to want to route. You don't, at least I don't see that many that, are winning first time out going this short of a distance. So I'm a little bit skeptical of, this is Granny's Kitten. I'm a little bit skeptical of, this one going this short. I think maybe this might be a prep run. What's interesting is this one is a half to a couple kittens we know. Granny's McKitten, who lost on debut by a nose, but then one second time out. That was routing, though, 8.5 furlong. And Kitten's Doublings is another one, another multiple grade 6 winner, who also didn't, this one did win first out, but this, again, was over 8.5 furlong. So this is a horse who I think, we'll probably see more of, but I'm just a little bit dubious about him at the distance. Fletcher has a couple in here. He has an Escondido firster in here named Escondido. He's a half to Caves Island, who of course was a pretty precocious 2-year-old, won his first 3 races. His works haven't been overly fast, so if there's kind of a little blemish to look at as far as this horse, because you have to think this horse, definitely probably going to take some money being by Fletcher, and considering how well he does with his first-time starters. His other first-time starter in here is a Super Saver. His name's Reality. His dam won 5.5 furlongs on the dirt in debut. So, there's definitely a little bit of win early pedigree in there. I expect this horse to, but at least be favored going into this race. I think that this one really has the pedigree and maybe is the danger for everyone else in here. Shug has a Warfront firster in here. Named Security Risk, and Warfront's interesting because he's not, at least early on, he's not having quite as good of a year with his 2-year-olds on debut as he did last year. But the dam on this one did win 2 of her first 3 starts as a 2-year-old, and she went on to be a pretty classy mare, ended up winning the Mother Goose later on as a 3-year-old. So maybe a little more promise of this one doing well early on. For me, though, I think there are questions about all of these more big-name horses. So even though I can see positives in them, I can definitely see negatives in all of them as well. I ended up landing on a horse named Magic Apple, and this is one of the few horses who does have a start under their belt. This horse is by Hard Spun, and the dam didn't win in her first 4 starts, but she's by Pulpit, and her dam did win first time out. So there is some breeding for precocity in there, even though her dam didn't win first time out. So, and mostly I'm taking this one because I liked how it looked in the first race. He jumped out of the gate in his first start, and the rider was pretty much standing up, coming out, and he rushed in to get the lead, and then he ended up giving away the race, really late. But considering all that happened early on, I'm willing to forgive that, and I think, not only the fitness that came with that run, but the experience that have come with that run will help him out here going second time out. His trainer does tend to do well with this dirt to turf switch and first time turf, and he has first time LASIK. So for me, I'm going to go, a little bit maybe outside the box here and go with Magic Apple.
A lot of times with these sprint races on the turf, it becomes a closer's race. But early on, sometimes speed is kind of deadly because these 2-year-olds haven't learned to really pass anybody, and they're kind of just asked for speed, and they kind of just have their workmates in the morning. A horse that's bred both sides for turf is a horse that's inside called Hope is Best. Shakespeare was a great turf horse, and then Street Cry on the mare side. So there's turf breeding on both sides, which sometimes can be a powerful angle. I've heard a lot of good things about this Shug McGahee horse, Security Risk. Very unusual for him to have a horse, a juvenile, working 35 flat in May, so I have a feeling this horse is probably going to be live. The Pletcher horse by Escondrea, the mare of that horse, Kamal, has produced a couple of nice horses, and just the way Pletcher has been running with his juvies this year, Angela, Renee, Nana's Boy, one of these two is going to be live. It'll probably be the Escondrea, but Super Savers had a few starters already. Overall, haven't been too impressed with them. In my opinion, Super Saver actually was kind of one of the weaker Derby winners we've had in recent years. So he was bred to be a good one, and it's kind of hard to tell how they're going to be as a sire. But he did get a good book of mares, and Windstar seems to be supporting him. So I guess my two, I think I'm going to go with the two obvious ones here, the Pletcher Escondido, and then also the Shug McGahee horse. But I do think Hope is Best has turf breeding on both sides, and could be one that, on the stretch out, maybe at Saratoga, second or third time out, could be one to watch.
Yeah, I think for me, I already said I like Magic Apple. As far as another one, I think I agree with you on the Shug Warfront Security Risk. That'd be the other one I would take. As far as both the Pletcher horses go, Super Saver has had 10 debut starters this year. Only one of them has won. Escondrea has had 5, and none of them have won. So just keep that in mind.
Should be good. Now Arlington's got their Arlington Million, kind of their preview day, and so there's 4 stakes in a row in the middle of the card. We'll kind of knock them down one by one here. First up, the Arlington Handicap, a mile on the turf, and should be a nice, good group of older horses.
Yes, these races at Arlington are really interesting. We might see some of these horses go forward on Million Day. For me, it was kind of a challenge to look over them because most of them have no pace, pretty much, and this is probably one of them. Short field of older horses here. To me, this seems like a race where, we have some horses in here, Admiral Kitten and Finnegans Wake and Infinite Magic, some of these horses who, they're classy horses, but maybe are just a little bit off their normal form here. Ultimately, I ended up siding with Finnegans Wake. I really was kind of going between him and Avanzare. Avanzare, I think, will be your leader here and could easily slow this down because I don't think anybody else will want to, challenge. I think he's definitely going to get an uncontested lead. But the distance worries me a little bit for him. This is 10 furlongs. And, Finnegans Wake, I think, is a horse who, while he's been a little bit off form this year, I think he definitely is the one who really wants every part of this distance. So, we'll see if he can kind of get it back going further, which I think, he tends to do better when the further he goes. And I have heard some things about the weather that we might get some rain, so, it might be even a little bit more testing ground than what it would be, over a dry track. So, for me, it's going to be Finnegans Wake. He loves running up to Arlington, and I think that he's the one to kind of beat here.
I wanted to talk a little bit about War Dancer. This horse ran at quite a few different tracks last year, and he seemed to run a pretty honest race every time. And one of the few tracks he didn't actually make it to was Arlington Park. It's kind of hard with this preview day because sometimes you wonder if this is the ultimate goal. Like, you've got grade 3 horses that are just trying to scoop up the money here, and then sometimes you have grade 1 horses that you obviously see that it's a prep. Like, to me, Finnegans Wake, you can just see that they're playing around, and the ultimate goal, the last 2 races, he wasn't really competitive, but you just know by the time the Arlington Million comes around, he's going to be there. So War Dancer, to me, he's got good form, but he does have some classy races last year. How do you kind of play these? Do you play them straight up, or do you kind of look in between the lines and see some horses that might be prepping?
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's obvious that there's some horses that are moving up in class and they're going to be really going for the win, and that there's others that, this isn't the ultimate goal, Million Day probably is. But in a really short field like this, I tend to kind of go with the class. I think that, for a horse like Finnegans Wake, even though this might not be the ultimate goal. I'm sure he's going to run a much improved race as, than he has his last 2 times out. And it's such a small field, and I don't see this as like a very tough field either. So I'm going to just go with the class, and I don't think there's that many horses in here who even want the distance. I mean, War Dancer is one who wants the distance. He's cutting back here, but this is a little bit steep of a class hike for my liking with him.
Mr. Mardi Gras is 10 for 39, and he's one of those horses that he'll run his race no matter what happens. I do think 10 furlongs is a little bit too much, but he's a 7-year-old. He's got experience running at Arlington Park the last few years. He runs on any surface, so I think yielding, hard, firm, sloppy on a main track, he'd actually probably be favored if it got switched to the slop. So Mr. Mardi Gras is kind of one of those horses that just kind of runs in the Midwest, and he does his thing, and if you beat him, you kind of got to bring at least your B game if you're some of the top contenders there. Now the 8th race is the Stars and Stripes, and this one, again, kind of a different pace scenario in this race as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, you just talked about Mr. Mardi Gras, because he was entered in the last race. He's also cross-entered here, and it's interesting that you said that you didn't think that he'd want to go 10 furlongs, because I actually prefer him in this race, which is further than the last race. I think that last race being such a short field and really no pace does him no favors. But this race, even though it's further, this is over a mile and a half, I think it's not, I don't know if it's necessarily going to be a fast pace, but I think you're definitely going to get a contested pace here. So, even though it's not fast, sometimes when these paces are, contested, you can still kind of see a little bit of a meltdown up front. I don't like Mr. Mardi Gras on top, but I think that you might be able to get, fair price on him if he runs here. And his last, like you said, he always runs his, his race every time. And his last 2 races are really nice. He ran over the synthetic in the Hanshin Cup, and ran against a pretty strong bias there, and so close to get second. And then next time after that, ended up closing, nicely to get the win over the turf. So, he's one who I think could kind of get up to get second or third. But this is another one that the pace it's a little bit tough to pick apart because it may not necessarily be fast, but there might be a whole bunch of horses jostling for position up front.
Suntracer is the Illinois bred, but he actually competes well in open company in the past. And 12 starts, only 1 win, but 5 seconds at Arlington. And he's another that he'll probably be favored just based on, he's kind of got the long fuse, and they're comfortable with this horse, and he's ran many times over Arlington. Suntracer kind of more of the, with those 5 seconds, maybe the horse that tends to get overplayed, or does he fit in this spot?
I think he fits in the spot. He's one who I like. I mean, you always get a little worried when you see them finishing second so often, and not even necessarily finishing second, but finishing as close to seconds as he tends to finish. We might get a little bit of insight because War Dancer, who he finished second to by head last time out, will run in the race before, so maybe that'll give us a little bit of a heads up. But I think he fits. I mean, he's who I like in the spot. He's not going to be any, great price. I think I agree. He's definitely going to be favored here, but he's one who is comfortable with the distance. He's comfortable with the track, and in a race like this where the pace is probably going to be contested, it'll play into his hand, I think, because he'll definitely be coming from near the back.
Well, I think as handicappers, we're obligated to say the pizza man always delivers. 10 for 15, and that's a win machine, and he's a homebred, and he's paid the bills all these years.
He has, and last time out was really impressive. He won locally, and he did so off of a really long layoff, which it's always nice to see, and you always maybe expect him to improve a little bit with a run under his belt after being away for so long. And I'm not really sure about him so much with the distance. He tends to do better going just a tick shorter than this. But one thing that he does like to be is near the front, and considering that we don't really have a strict front runner in here, maybe he'll be the one who ends up taking the lead.
The horse I ended up going with is Olympic Thunder. He's got a long losing streak. I think it's up to 11 races now. But good trainer. He's ran competitive races. I think he'll like the distance. So he's kind of one of the, and he gets Alan Garcia, who kind of is an underrated turf rider, and on some of these long races, he's brought in quite a few upsets. I was looking over the last few years, especially out east. So I think that's kind of my angle here. Long losing streak, good trainer, and then a jock that likes to bring in horses at a price, long distance on the turf.
Yeah, and he is another one too. If people are, pay attention to kind of the flattering angles and the forms of races, his last race, Avanzare won that, and he runs in the race before this as well. So you might be able to get a sense of, the form and the strength of some of these past races from the first race of this kind of series of stakes.
The American Derby is kind of the third leg of the 4 stakes races. This is for 3-year-olds. Some of these horses we've been following, and do you have any opinions in this race here?
This race is a lot more tricky than I thought, and I think distance makes it tricky. I mean, on class alone, I think Divine Oath is going to end up being a major player in this 3-year-old turf division, but I wonder if he really wants to go this far or if a mile is much better. He hasn't ran a bad race to date, in my opinion. He won his first 2 starts. He chased Mr. Speaker all the way around at Lexington, and then, even in the Penn Mile, he finished 4th, but Bobby's Kitten, pretty much walked the dog that day. He didn't have a chance coming from where he was at, and I thought he still closed pretty nicely to finish where he did in that race. He's definitely the class is filled. I'd expect him to go off favorite here, but I'm really concerned about the distance with him, and especially if weather does come into play, and this ground is even more testing, you kind of want a horse who you're really sure about the distance, or one who's even, has the potential to want to go further.
Well, I'm finally excited to see Schoolofhardrocks get back on his game the last race, and they did it right. After he kind of flopped on the dirt a couple of times, in which, anymore, I'm not even so sure that he flopped, because the horse that he lost to twice ended up winning the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness. So, yeah. I mean, we really don't know what he's capable of on the dirt. I mean, obviously he's probably not as good on dirt, but then they did the nice sprint turf race, which he was favored for some reason, but last race was what it was all about. And basically that's what an old school trainer does. He purposely ran him 6.5 furlongs to get him ready on the turf, and then they stretched him out, and he won by 4 the last time. He's shipping in. I like this horse all along. Distance shouldn't be a problem. I think he's coming to Chicago for the money grab. He's going to get some deep dish pizza on the way, and I'm expecting a big race out of him here.
I was really hoping we were going to get a Schoolofhardrocks, big lecture on why he's going to win from you, because I know he's a horse you really liked, and he of course debuted in a big way over at Del Mar on the synthetic, so maybe he was meant to go on this turf all along. For me, I'm going with our channel, and I'm sure I'll get flack for going for the Urals, which is what everybody says. He is a Kentucky bred though, but he'll be making his U.S. debut. He ran overseas in England and didn't do a lot. He broke his maiden at the end of the year as a 2-year-old, and then he came back as a 3-year-old and he won a prep for the Epsom Derby, but it was a pretty weak prep. It wasn't a strong one by any means. Then they threw him into the Epsom Derby itself and he flopped, but I mean, going from the race that he ran in a conditions race to, a English classic race, it was kind of like throwing him to the wolves, I think. I mean, that's a pretty big class jump there, and he led him most of the way in that race and then just got overwhelmed late, and so I think he'll appreciate cutting back a little bit here in distance. This is more up his alley as far as distance goes. If weather comes into play, he is the one horse in this field who I'm fully confident will handle it without any issues. He's won over good turf, he's won over firm turf, he's won over soft. He's won good to soft, and he's won on firm turf, so that shouldn't be an issue with him at all here. He doesn't get Lasix, which I know some people pay attention to with the Urals. I don't mind that. It's not a big deal to me whether or not he gets Lasix. So I'm going to go with our channel. I think that he's the one. Distance isn't the issue. If it rains, no big deal. I expect him to run better than he showed us last time out over at Epsom.
Yeah, I think there's always a lot of talk on the Derby Trail that owners catch Derby fever, and I think our channel was a perfect case of Epsom Derby
Derby
fever
fever.
over in Europe. I mean, and I think this horse is going to be bet hard. I think people are going to look right past that. You know, this horse in that race was kind of like Charming Kitten in our Kentucky Derby this year. And he
Yeah.
was overmatched, he was outclassed, but he was going to run in the race, and they did. And now he's got to find his form, and I think this is a logical spot. That trainer I know has brought shipped in horses in the past. I'm expecting a big race out of him. You know, the problem with the Euros is a lot of time they fire first time off the plane, and then if and sometimes that's kind of the plan. They'll try to fire and win the first time, and then they'll bring Lasix back for the second race. So that's an angle to watch too. To kind of what they don't want to do is bring them over on the plane, give them the Lasix, and then they lose a lot of water weight, and then they can't train up for the second race. So I think it's part of the old Lawrence Welk two-step here. So I think they're bringing him over for that. I did want to mention a horse, Afortable. You know, he won at 19-1 at Keeneland, and you know, guys like me, I like looking at the pedigrees, and you may notice the mare on that horse is the tax deduction mare, and she's an Illinois-bred mare. She's had like 9 foals. She's had like 8 winners. She's had like 7 stakes winners. This guy is a half-brother to Suntracer, a younger half-brother, and just that mare is just one of the best Illinois-bred mares of all time. And actually, she was a stakes winner herself in Chicago back in the day.
You read my mind. That's exactly who I was going to bring up next. Yeah, this is a horse who I like quite a bit, and I think I think I picked him in Long on Value back in the Arlington Classic, and that was when Easton Ford, you know, won from gate to wire. So for him to close from 7th to 3rd in a race like that was really nice, and you know, I think he's one who can run big here. I'm not sure the post position helps him by any means, but you know, he is one who I expect him to run a good race. He just seems to run an honest race every time, and you know, he clearly likes running on the turf. His one bad finish was on synthetic, so you know, come racing at home, racing over a course he knows, and coming off of a solid effort last time out, I think he's one to keep an eye on. One thing I will say back with our channel to keep an eye on though is he can hang, and it's happened a few times, so be wary of that.
Good, and then also, since I've been doing this for a while, it's the Murphy's Law. Since you picked Chief Barker the last 2 times and you're not talking about him this time,
he's going to win.
He'll win the race by 5 lengths and pay $16.
Yes, I saw him here and I was like, okay, I can't pick him again. One thing I will say about him, I guess, though, is that, well, I mean, he's kind of a totally different horse out here than he was in Europe, but I don't know if it's in a great way. Like, he's just really one pace now. I don't know what happened. Like, he didn't used to be like that. But with horses like that, I mean, they're doing the right thing. Just keep stretching them out as far as you can, because, you know, he's going to stay, but he doesn't have a big kick or anything like that. So, I mean, he'll stay. He might be up there, but I just, I'm a little wary. I'm pretty sure, I can't see here on the past performances, but I see he doesn't have Lasix. I'm pretty sure he's Lasix off. I'm pretty sure he had Lasix last time out. So something to keep an eye on, I guess, too, with him. But I don't like him on top. He could easily clunk up to get like 2nd or 3rd. Maybe he'll be the forgotten Euro in this race.
No, and that's you know, always interesting wagering angle. Now the 10th race would go to the ladies and the Modesty Handicap. This race usually produces, of the 4 races, I've noticed over the years, this one usually gets 2 or 3 horses into the Beverly D. So I always think of this as of the 4 races, this actually does its purpose of getting horses to the Beverly D.
Yeah, that's a race that, I mean, I don't know if any of these gals are going to be able to contend. I mean, that's a race that already, you know, is looking to be so loaded as far as, you know, horses who, you know, are on the potential entry list and stuff. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see if any of these gals can hang, because that one's looking to maybe potentially be the most competitive of any of the races on Million Day. For me, it's you know, I like this race now. We got a really big field, and you know, that's always a little bit more fun for me to handicap. I ended up going with a horse here named Kepi. She's 6 years old. She's 2 for 2 this year. She just tends to always run a pretty honest race every time out. She's going to be up near the front, which I think is going to be good. A lot of these horses here like to close, so I expect her to kind of be up near the lead and then just take him as far as she can and hope she can go this far. I mean, she tends to be running shorter distances than this, but you know, this is one of these races where I think she's going to be at the lead. hitting the stretch, and we'll see what happens there. But I think she could take him.
A horse that kind of grabbed my eye right away was Embarr, the one horse here. And this horse kind of goes in and out of form. And if you noticed in the past, it doesn't really seem to show anything when it gets into form. So you kind of just have to watch its races, good post position. I think she's going to be really long in this race, and I could easily see a top 4 finish. The one Pimlico race, she did have a little bit of trip trouble. The last race I watched, I really couldn't find any trip problems. I just kind of know the barn and the way this horse rounds into a form cycle. I just have a feeling that she's going to probably run a better race here at Arlington, and I think that is one of them that maybe they're trying ultimately to run in the Beverly D. IO Ireland won last year on the Arlington Million Day at 22-1. Did you look at her at all in this race?
I did a little bit. I think that she might be a little bit overmatched here. One who I also want to mention was Maid on a Mission in a race here where, it's another one where we don't have a lot of early speed. This is, one of the horses who I think this might be your likely pace setter, to be honest, is Maid on a Mission. Maybe we can see, her and Kepi will maybe be the ones in front. And, this is one who maybe has consistently run a little bit further than Kepi. Again, doesn't routinely run quite this far. But I think in a race like this, I'm kind of trying to look for horses who are going to be a little more forwardly placed, just because it seems like everybody here, for the most part, really wants to close. So Maid on a Mission is another one I think maybe to keep an eye on. Also, since weather might come into play, and I think people on downgraded tracks tend to try to side with some of the horses who were originally traded in Europe, I will mention that Golsuri and To Breed, both of them were originally traded in Europe, but neither of them really showed much of a liking for softer turf. So they might not be the plays. Well, I don't even like them over fast ground, but maybe don't get baited into picking one of them if the ground is downgraded here.
One of the things for wagering strategy, I think we learned last week in those 2 races at Belmont was that, really what you got to do is kind of just pick a couple of horses and don't be afraid to box. And if a horse is going off, that kind of make a morning line for the 3 or 4 contenders and decide from there based on how the public's wagering. Because if you try to pick a winner, like to me, trying to pick a winner in the modesty is kind of pointless. But yeah. I think you can construct some wagers that you can have fun and possibly make some money.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and that's for these fields where we see full fields. It's just sitting there and being like, okay, this horse is going to win. That's really tough. But if you say, okay, I like these horses. Like for me, I would say, okay, I like Kepi, I like Maid on a Mission, I like Embarr. Then box them in exactas or in tries and see what happens. And I just think you're putting the odds a little bit. I mean, it's never going to be in your favor, but you're shoring up your odds a little bit there by going with a couple multiple runners.
Well, this time of the year for the next couple of weeks, it's a lot of turf racing, and then we're only a few weeks from Del Mar and Saratoga opening. We've heard some rumors about the Haskell field coming together. Any thoughts on Tapabola if she should take on the Haskell, or what's kind of your thoughts as we're a few weeks away from that?
I think she should. I mean, I think that I'm not hearing very many people saying that she shouldn't. I mean, whether or not you think she'd win, it's a different story. And I think I'm someone who's not just going to be like, oh, it's over, she's going to win, which a lot of people seem to think that way, which is interesting. But I see no reason why she shouldn't go. I mean, the horses we're hearing Bayern, we're hearing Wildcat Red, we're hearing Medal Count, and I think she fits right in with that group. And not only from a class perspective, but from kind of if you're starting to think pace a little bit, she is a horse who not only possesses speed but can rate off the pace, and I think that's exactly what you're going to want in a race like that. So I definitely think that she should go.
And out east this week, Princess of Silmar will probably be 1-9 in the Delaware Handicap. This is one of those races that always gets a lot of social media chatter. If they don't win by enough, they were unimpressive, and if they win by too much, they didn't beat anything. But, I mean, Princess, we're into July now, and she doesn't have a win this year. So to me, at some point, you got to just get a win.
Definitely agree there. I mean, she thinks she needs a little bit of a confidence boost. It's been a, I don't want to say it's been a decline from last year, but she just isn't keeping quite that same form. If she doesn't win here, I'd be a bit concerned though for sure. Short field with her, by far being the class in there. I also want to mention my buddy Granger is running in a grade 2 this weekend too. I'm sure he'll be favored. Joel Rosario gets the nod.
And that's at Belmont?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll keep an eye on that one. Well, we're into a bunch of turf races today. I think the big focus will be on Chicago with a lot of handicappers, and we'll talk to you next week on another edition of Down to the Wire.